You're ready.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and get started, I think, although judging by the number of lunch boxes, there's people still to come. So we'll let them filter in. But it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Donald Warne, who's Oglala Lakota, and is now at North Dakota State University. And excuse my voice, because I can barely talk because of my cold, so I'm going to say everything wrong here today. So Don is... I have the pleasure of knowing Don through the Spirit of Eagles project, which I'm part of on this campus, and he's a national advisor for that project. But he's an expert in American Indian health policy and comes from a family of traditional healers, which I think is going to be more the focus today. This morning he talked a lot in his grand rounds at Cancer about American Indian health policy and health equity issues, which was really important. Reading his impressive CV, I'm impressed by the diversity of things he's done in terms of policy work, education work, research work, and then also in both traditional and non-traditional sort of practice. He has published widely in American Indian health policy, cancer policy, bioethics, and integrating medical practice with traditional ways. His MD is from Stanford, and his MPH is from Harvard University. He's done a fellowship in integrative medicine in Arizona and medical acupuncture, I think, in California. So he has an interest there as well. So I think, without further ado, I'll introduce him, and we're going to try and make this interactive, so feel free to ask questions, and hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well for that.
Hello, thank you, and welcome to all my relations here today. It's a small enough group. If it's okay, maybe we could just have real quick introductions so I know who you are, if you have a tribal affiliation, and then if you're a student or on staff here.
I'm Tiana Bodine. I'm a physician assistant at House of Wellness for
Very good.
I'm Leah Arndt. I'm faculty at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee Educational Psychology.
I'm Shannon Chavez-Carell, and I'm also a counseling psychology faculty member at UW in Milwaukee.
Very good.
And I'm Jacqueline Arbuckle, and I grew up in the same kind of way of conservation and here as a general surgeon with UW.
Rebecca Linskins, Cancer Health Disparities Initiative Community Health Educator.
Erin Bailey, Cancer Health Disparities Initiative, I'm an Education and Outreach Associate.
Amy Williamson, Cancer Health Disparities Initiative.
Bobby Kaigavi, I'm a second-year med student, and I'm with the Lakota Ojibwe tribe.
Josh Saylor from Fort Berthold, North Dakota. I'm also an M2.
Jean Strickland, with the Comprehensive Cancer Control Program.
Noel Locanti, I am a GI oncologist, also with the Cancer Control Program.
Sarah Edmund, Collaborative Center for Health Equity.
Dorothy Edwards, I'm a psychologist in the Department of Kinesiology, and I'm doing a research project on biomarker participation.
I'm Diane Michalski-Turner, and I'm with the Biomarkers Project. I probably should introduce myself when I was giving the introductions, but my cold is prohibiting me from thinking clearly. I'm Alex Adams, Director of the Collaborative Center for Health Equity.
All right. Well, as Alex said, my name is Donald Warne. My Lakota name is Prejuta Wichasha. I was named after my grandfather. Prejuta Wichasha means medicine man. And I was very fortunate to grow up in a family with a lot of traditional healers. And my initial exposure to healthcare really was in traditional Lakota medicine. And I still participate in ceremonies every year. I have several uncles who run sun dances at Pine Ridge Reservation, and I'm from a little village called Kyle, South Dakota. Who's been to Kyle? Wow, that's one more than usual. That's pretty good. We have a freeway stop sign. That's how big our town is. But it's very close to the Badlands in South Dakota. We have our sun dance very close to that area. So I still go back every summer for that, and really that's been kind of the basis and the source of strength to go through medical education, residency, and all the challenges that we do. But I went into my medical training kind of naively, thinking I was going to have a big impact on Indian health as a primary care doctor. And what I found is that we can have an impact on individual patients, which is valuable and meaningful. But in truth, the health problems occur long before people get to us in the clinic or in the hospital. So we have to look at things from a more systemic perspective, a bigger, holistic perspective. And in truth, there's much that needs to be done in the policy arena, which I discussed this morning, and that will be available online if people want to see the more specific cancer policy issues. But today I wanted to talk about how we can integrate traditional and modern medicine. And probably won't get through the whole presentation, which is fine, because I'd really like to also have some discussion, but wanted to talk a little bit about culture and cultural competence, American Indian demographics and health disparities, and how we can use traditional approaches to address our health disparities, and then a comparison of modern and traditional medicine. Then we'll talk about the concept of the medicine wheel, and I'm sure many of us have an understanding of that concept and the sacred hoop and circular symbolism, but we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. So in terms of cultural competence, I've looked in the medical literature, and we have very little in terms of cultural competency or even concepts like spirituality in healthcare. It's really in the nursing literature where we've seen more of that, or in the psychology literature as well. But this is my favorite definition of culture: the totality of socially transmitted behavioral patterns, beliefs, values, and customs, and thought characteristics of a population that guides worldview and decision-making. And I like that definition because it opens the door to more than one perspective on culture. Because in truth, there's not an American Indian culture. There are hundreds of American Indian cultures and languages. And when we look at this, it's not just about Indian and non-Indian. There's all kinds of cultures that we participate in. Is there a culture of medicine? Socially transmitted thought characteristics and beliefs, and even language, even our regalia. I see some of the standard medicine regalia in the room with the white coats, right? So think about this. There is a culture of medicine, and even within medicine, is there a culture of surgery? Is there a culture of oncology? In Indian Health Service, is there a culture of Indian Health Service? Well, absolutely. So when I think about this, it's more than just Indian and non-Indian. There's much more depth to the whole idea of cultural competency and culturally appropriate care. And even looking at our communities, I worked a lot with the Gila River Indian community in Arizona, and they're well known because they have the highest rate of type 2 diabetes in the world. It's now half their population over age 30 has type 2 diabetes, so there's tremendous amounts of diabetes. So in that community, there's actually a culture of diabetes where people grow up surrounded and immersed within diabetes. So there's a sense that diabetes is just a part of the community now. And I heard a lot of patients over the years say things like, I don't have diabetes yet. I don't have diabetes yet. Do they believe they're going to get diabetes? You bet. And if they believe they're going to get diabetes, does that have an impact on their health behaviors? Absolutely. Why shouldn't they drink soda and eat fry bread? They're going to get diabetes anyway. They believe that. And that's part of the modern culture of that community. Is there also a culture of poverty? Does poverty guide our worldview and make us have different beliefs about what's possible for us? So when we think about culture, it has to be a broader perspective. It's not just Indian and non-Indian. So what is cultural competence? Well, this is my favorite definition of cultural competence: the ability of systems to provide services to clients with diverse values, beliefs, and behaviors, including tailoring services to meet clients' social, cultural, and linguistic needs. So that really is about health equity and looking at individuals for what they need as individuals, not what a system needs, but what are the needs of the people engaging the system. And I think we have a lot of room for improvement when we're looking at things like Indian Health Service and culturally competent care. Other definitions, and I won't go into detail here, but there are now culturally and linguistically appropriate standards that have been defined by the Office of Minority Health, focused on culturally competent care, language access, and organizational supports for cultural competence. When I was doing my residency in Phoenix back in the 1990s, it was a hospital that served a large Hispanic population. And I asked, well, what is our cultural competency program? And they said, oh, we have Spanish interpreters. That was the degree of their cultural competency program. So we've seen things improve in terms of actually looking at culture and its role in healthcare more. Well, what are some barriers? Underrepresentation or underrepresented minorities. That's what underrepresented means. There's less of us in things like health professions, which is why it's so wonderful to see so many American Indian colleagues here in Wisconsin in the health professions. It just makes me feel very good to be here. But we do have less of us in leadership and workforce and research positions, tenured faculty positions, very few American Indians. I'm one of 4 American Indian faculty at North Dakota State. I'm the only tenured faculty at NDSU. So we still have underrepresentation even though we're making improvements. Other barriers: systems and services can be poorly designed to meet the needs of diverse patient populations. I think when we look at our health system and we look at medical science, we do take a one-size-fits-all approach. And if we think of medical science as being a square peg, we're trying to fit that square peg into round holes sometimes, and it doesn't always work. So we need to think of things in a more creative way, in a more holistic way, the way that our ancestors would think of things. And we can also see poor communication between point of services providers and consumers of different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. And that's true at the individual level, but even at the systemic level. Is it possible that a patient is seen at the University Medical Center and is sent back to an IHS or a tribal facility without coordinating care? Is it possible that American Indians go back to their home reservation with prescriptions for medications that the IHS doesn't carry? Not only is that possible, that happens all the time. So the cultural competency is not just at that individual level, it's also at the systems level as well. So benefits. Obviously improving communication, improving quality of services, and hopefully reducing health disparities. Now this is from the nursing literature. As I mentioned, there's very little in medical literature, but this is my favorite model for cultural competence. And the terminology is kind of funny, but it does make sense. At one level, there's unconsciously incompetent, which means you're not culturally competent and you're not even aware. How many of us know some of those people? Then there's consciously incompetent, in which people say things like, I recognize that I don't know how to engage this community, but I want help doing it. So at least they're aware that they're not culturally competent. Then there's consciously competent, where people are providing culturally competent services because they're making an effort to do so. And then there's unconsciously competent, in which you're providing culturally competent services because it's who you are. And what an argument for diversity in the healthcare workforce. The more diversity, the more opportunity for unconsciously competent care, not having to try to be competent, just being who we are as people and connecting with our own communities. So, some personal perspectives, looking at modern versus traditional health beliefs. I love this old photograph. This is actually a picture of Chief Red Cloud, who was a Lakota leader in the late 1800s and one of the federal agents that he was working with when they were doing land settlements for the reservations. And I like this photograph because there's so much symbolism built into this when we think about how the federal government has worked with Native people. In the traditional Lakota way, he's supposed to be quiet and humble. You can see he's in a seated position. You're also not supposed to look someone directly in the eye. That's seen as a confrontational behavior. You can look people in the eye who you have a very close connection with, or when you're in a confrontational realm, but you don't look strangers in the eye. What's the first thing they teach us in our medical interviewing class? Look your patients in the eye, right? One size fits all. Now, I can do it now. I can force myself. It's uncomfortable, but I can do it now. But you can see he's looking down, showing respect. And I've worked in Indian health in a number of different arenas, and several times now, I've had new non-Indian physicians talk to me and say, none of these patients they don't respect me. They won't even look me in the eye. And then the patients will say, that doctor didn't respect me. He looked me right in the eye. So we're just not quite connecting from a cultural perspective. But then look at the symbolism here, the federal agent standing over him, looking down on him from a superior position and looking him right in the eye. Now, from each person's cultural perspective, they're behaving appropriately. But my question is, at that handshake, how well do they understand each other? How well does Red Cloud understand the agent? How well does the agent understand Red Cloud? Well, if you look at the land settlements, obviously not very well. But look at this from a medical perspective. We have a well-trained, modern scientific physician working with a traditional American Indian person who's grown up in a culture of poverty and maybe a culture of diabetes. And they're now going to diagnose diabetes. The perspective of what that means could be completely different from the person who grew up immersed in a community of diabetes. When they hear that word, they think amputations. They think dialysis. They think insulin shots. They think death. Is there a grieving process that occurs? Do we see denial? Do we see anger? Do we see depression? Absolutely. From a modern scientific perspective, what are we taught to say? If your blood sugar is too high, we need to check your hemoglobin A1C. Well, it is too high, but is it addressing it from the patient's perspective, or is it taking a one-size-fits-all scientific perspective? And I think one of the reasons we are ineffective at managing chronic disease like diabetes is that our system is culturally incompetent. We don't understand the people we're talking to as a system. And again, what an argument for diversity in the workforce. So for all the Indians in the room, what's this a picture of? Go ahead and answer. You can say it. Say it.
Well, I might be wrong, but to me, when I look at that, I think of the health services
Yep, that's
professionals.
Commissioned Corps Officers, United States Public Health Service. All of us who've gone to IHS facilities, we see our uniformed doctors and nurses and healthcare providers, right? When I show this to non-Indian audiences, quite often they're surprised because if you think about this, think about the mission of a healer, a provider, a doctor, a nurse. And then think about the mission of a soldier. And think about the history of federal-tribal relations, the history of conquest, the history of warfare, the history of massacres. Is it culturally appropriate for Indian Health Service doctors to dress like soldiers? Isn't that remarkable? No, this isn't historical. This is happening right now. Go to IHS facilities, you see doctors dressed like soldiers. And did you know on Casual Friday now, they can wear fatigues and combat boots. You see dentists and pharmacists wearing fatigues and combat boots, seeing my relatives. Talk about institutionalized cultural incompetence. Now, part of colonization is buying into this. I have Indian colleagues who are commissioned corps officers. Maybe we need to take a step back and look at that from a modern perspective. Is that appropriate? My personal perspective, no, it's not appropriate. But that's our circumstance. That's what we're dealing with. So take another step back and look at healthcare generally. As American Indians, we're unique in this country because we are born with a legal right to healthcare services. And the graphic here on the left is actually from the IHS website that talks about the legal basis for health services. On the right is actually one example of many hundreds of treaties that were signed between the tribal nations and the federal government. This happens to be the treaty with the Potawatomi Nation in 1846. And the common language in these treaties, and I know it's in very fine print, but at the bottom here it states, and the United States giving at the same time promise of all proper care and protection. Promise of all proper care and protection. As American Indians, looking at our healthcare needs, are we receiving all proper care? No. Not even close. And these treaties are contracts between the tribal nations and the federal government. The U.S. government is in breach of contract. So adding that on top of it, we have a challenge of cultural competency, but we also have to deal with a system that has not lived up to its obligations to us. Now we know our areas are very diverse. Each tribe is unique. I always like to say if you've worked with one tribe, you've worked with one tribe. Each tribe is different. Each region is different. The languages are different. And even within a tribe, you have quite often those who are very traditional and those who are very non-traditional. There's a spectrum of us. We have a lot of diversity in Indian country. One of the things that we do observe, though, is we have worse disparities in our region here. The northern tier tends to be the Bemidji area, Aberdeen area, Billings area tend to have the worst health disparities. We also have the highest rates of poverty, unfortunately. This is South Dakota, where I'm from. We have 9 reservations. What's unique about South Dakota, it's all essentially one tribe, looking at the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota. And those 9 tribes, and the 5 in the western part of the state are the larger tribes. I'm from Pine Ridge and the southwest corner there. Here in Minnesota, 11 federally recognized tribes, 11 sovereign nations within the state. About 50,000 American Indians, about 1% of the population here. And then more diversity in terms of the numbers and types of tribes, right? Not all one tribal group. So when you're working with tribes in Wisconsin, you have to recognize there's going to be different languages, different belief systems, different cultures. So if you look at our demographics, I don't have the 2010 census numbers up there yet. I need to get that, but we have increased our numbers. But basically, if we look at American Indian or Alaska Native only, 2.6 million. I believe that's up closer now to 3 million. And for American Indian and Alaska Native, in combination with other populations, 2.6 to 3.7 million, 2000 to 2010. Over 4 million American Indian and other races and ethnicities About 60% of us live in cities. Most of us are not living in reservations. About 50,000 people here in Wisconsin. Over 560 federally recognized tribes, again, 11 in Wisconsin. Now with those numbers, it's a little misleading, 560, because over 200 are in Alaska and over 100 are in California. So those two states actually have the majority of tribes, but most of them are very small villages or rancherias, not very large tribes. 22% of American Indians live in poverty in Wisconsin versus 9% of the general population. Again, a culture of poverty quite often that we're dealing with. So let's talk about Indian country. It's all Indian country. Now, historically, we did not draw the lines between the U.S. and Canada and the U.S. and Mexico. Those were drawn for us. And when we had the 13 colonies, was that good for the northeastern tribes? Well, no. You may have heard of Amherst College or Amherst, Massachusetts, named after Lord Jeffrey Amherst, who was a colonial governor in Massachusetts. And he actually ordered the distribution of blankets from a smallpox hospital to the northeastern tribes. And you can Google it, look it up, Amherst smallpox. You'll find that even the letter that he wrote to the colonial army leadership to distribute blankets to kill them. So essentially the first documented case of bioterrorism was our own colonial government, something that's kind of lost in our history books, generally speaking. I'm sure you've heard of the Trail of Tears, right? The southeastern tribes being moved to Oklahoma. And that was basically to make way for more migration of non-Indian people coming into Indian country. But what that had the effect of doing is splitting a lot of tribes in half. So people, let's say the Seminoles, were told to move to Oklahoma. Well, some moved and some stayed behind. So that's why now we have Seminoles in Florida and Seminoles in Oklahoma. Same is true for Cherokees. We have Cherokees in North Carolina, Cherokees in Oklahoma, Choctaws in Mississippi, Choctaws in Oklahoma. So a lot of the tribes really split apart during that process. Was the discovery of gold good for the California tribes? Well, unfortunately, no. That's how one of the largest waves of genocide in history was wiping out of many of the California tribes because of the need to access gold. So this is what we're left with. So when I look at this, I don't look at just the land. Think of all of that loss. Loss of sacred sites, loss of self-sufficiency, loss of culture, loss of language, loss of leadership, and particularly the self-sufficiency and the self-esteem issues that come with being now dependent on another population of people for survival programs. So there's a tremendous amount of losses associated with that. Does it have an impact on health? You bet it does. Does it have an impact on culture? Well, you bet it does. So we have to be honest about our history, recognize that where we are now is a very different place than where our ancestors were many, many years ago. This is a map from the U.S. Census website looking at the concentration of American Indian population by county. You can see here, particularly northern Wisconsin, higher concentration. But it seems that most of us are now in the western part of the United States. So again, promise of all proper care and protection. I know a lot of people have seen this slide. It's looking at the various federally funded health systems in the U.S. And Medicare is far left, $11,000 per person per year. You see national health expenditures, about $6,700. Veterans, $6,100 per person per year. All the way to the right, Indian Health Service, about $2,600 per person. So embedded within our challenges of providing culturally competent care is significant underfunding of our health system. Again, that's leading to more disparities. If we look at comparing Aberdeen area IHS, where I'm from, the Dakotas and Nebraska, about a 10-year difference in life expectancy. If you look at the median age of death in South Dakota, 81 for the general population, 58 for American Indians. That's just remarkable. That's third world health conditions right here in the U.S. Well, why is that? We have higher rates of diabetes, death from diabetes, death from alcoholism, death from accidents, and suicide. And that's just looking at the Indian Health Service totally. And if we compare IHS to Aberdeen area, and Bemidji area, unfortunately, is not far behind Aberdeen area in these numbers. Very high rates of death due to diabetes and IHS population, even worse in the northern tier of the U.S. Unfortunately, same is true for alcohol-related deaths. Much worse in IHS compared to the rest of the country, even worse here in the northern tier. So one of the things that I've seen in hundreds of patients is this triad. I see high rates of depression in people with diabetes. I really think depression should be considered a complication of diabetes. It's so prevalent. And what's the most common self-medication for depression? Alcohol intake. Does alcohol intake worsen your blood sugar? And worsen your depression? And worsen your alcohol intake? And worsen your blood sugar? So rather than looking at this as a holistic syndrome, which it is, in our wisdom of modern medicine, we've decided to cut that patient in half, haven't we? And we say that diabetes and outpatient depression management is a medical issue. But if you have major depression and need alcohol treatment, well, that's a behavioral issue. And unfortunately, most systems have a sharp demarcation between behavioral and medical. And we don't have case managers that overlap with each other. We don't communicate with each other. We don't have coordinated plans of care. So if one wanted to create a system to fail, that's how you do it. You've proven it. This doesn't work. We need a holistic approach. And the holistic approach does not lie within modern medicine. The holistic approach is traditional medicine. We need the best of modern science, but also the best of traditional medicine. So when I convert to that, I always like to start with a brief history of medicine. 2000 BC, here eat this root. 1000 AD, that root is heathen, here say this prayer. 1800, that prayer is superstition, here drink this potion. 1900, that potion is snake oil, here swallow this pill. 1950, that pill is ineffective, here take this antibiotic. And year 2000, that antibiotic is artificial, here eat this root. Kind of come full circle, haven't we? Now there's this resurgence of interest and commitment to things like alternative medicine or integrative medicine, or even traditional American Indian medicine. And in truth, all systems of care at one point in time were holistic. Even modern medicine used to incorporate spirituality in the healing process. And when we discovered antibiotics, that was probably the most significant scientific discovery in medicine of the last century, because we could now cure things that at one point could kill us. What a remarkable discovery in science. But when we think about antibiotics, that's actually naturopathic medicine. The first antibiotics were isolated from molds. And for millennia, mold and bacteria have been competing with each other for space and food. So they created chemicals to kill each other. So penicillin came from penicillium, a mold. Streptomycin came from streptomyces, another mold. So in truth, the biggest scientific advance in modern scientific medicine is that we finally harnessed the healing power of mold. Makes me wonder if mildew might have that. Now, I talked to my uncles and other elders who are traditional healers. And did you know they used to know what types of molds to use for wound dressings? Our people were using antibiotics long before modern science discovered antibiotics. Part of our traditional healing systems, and unfortunately what we were mostly lost because of this tremendous history of loss of territory facilities. So when we look at the differences between modern and traditional medicine, the model is very different. You know, I went through medical school and residency knowing that I was learning allopathic medicine, but I really had no idea what the word allopathic meant. Does anyone know what is allopathic? You know where that comes from? You're training in allopathic medicine. Well, allopathic actually comes from two Greek words. Allos, meaning opposite or other, and pathos, meaning disease or suffering. So pathology is the study of disease. So in allopathic medicine, we're trying to produce the opposite effect of the disease or symptom that we are treating. So that's why so many of our medications are anti-something. Antibiotics, antihypertensives, antidepressants. Or they are blockers, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers. Or they're lytics, meaning to lyse or kill, anxiolytics, thrombolytics. So we're really at war, aren't we, in modern medicine? Get your diagnosis, get your anti, and just beat the heck out of it. Can that cause side effects? Can it have unintended consequences? Well, absolutely. So in allopathic medicine, we tend to be very good at treating things that are purely in the physical arena. Anti-inflammatories tend to work pretty well with inflammation. Antibiotics tend to work pretty well with infections. Does antabuse work for treating addiction? So those of you who work in the behavioral health arena, antabuse is a completely ineffective medication for treating alcohol abuse, but it's taking an allopathic approach to a non-physical ailment. In the traditional way, we had a holistic model. And the first thing I noticed about that is it's not holopathic. It's not about the disease. It's about the person. Instead of treating disease, we're treating a person. And in modern medicine, we tend to call ourselves healthcare providers. But when I think about my training and my practice, I'm really a disease care provider in modern medicine. We'd be better off called disease care providers than healthcare providers. In the traditional way, it was holistic. It wasn't about treating disease or symptoms. It was about identifying imbalances in that individual and treating those imbalances. So even the word medicine has different meanings. In modern medicine, the word medicine really is rooted in the physical realm. It's, go to the doctor to get some medicine basically means you go get some pills. Whereas in the traditional way, medicine is rooted in the spiritual arena. And medicine is seen as a healing force or a healing energy. And the traditional healers try to channel that healing energy in the right direction. They don't own that healing force or that healing energy. It's a spiritual-based healing system. And something that's outside the control of man, but it is a natural force. Even if you're driving and you see an old road, and you see how even the earth is healing itself, right? Things are growing through the old road, that might have been paved at one point. There is a healing energy and a healing force of the earth, that we are of the earth. We are literally the dust of our ancestors, brought together with spiritual energy to be the beings that we are. And there's power in that. There's healing energy in that that's not describable in biomedical science. There's a whole other world of healing energy and spirituality that has an impact on all of us, whether or not we're aware of it. So even the word health has different meanings. In modern medicine, modern science, I think the strictest definition of health would be no disease, no no allopathic need or approach. Whereas in traditional medicine, health is seen as balance among spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional forces. So recognizing that there's more to health than just absence of disease. Also, the provider is different. Another word for modern doctor is physician, right? Well, look at the word physician. That actually has the root physic, which means the natural sciences. In Latin, physic means natural sciences. So in modern medicine, as physicians, we're saying right up front, we deal in the physical arena as physicians. And in truth, we're missing the whole picture of balance and health if we're just focused on the physical arena. Whereas in the traditional way, a provider was a healer. This is one of my favorite old photographs. I showed it earlier this morning as well. This is one of my ancestors from Pine Ridge. He's a medicine man, and what he's doing here is very different than what we see in the modern clinic, isn't it? He's touching the patient, he's praying with the patient, meditating with the patient, and the family and the community are participating in that healing process. And I always like to point out that this might not be HIPAA compliant, but it is meaningful and powerful healthcare. And in truth, when we look at our disparities and we look at chronic disease, we really need to have a holistic and balanced approach to our disparities. So we need to be able to integrate modern and traditional medicine. Now, we focus on treating or managing disease in the individual in modern medicine, whereas in traditional medicine, the focus really is on promoting health in the community. And I think one of the advantages that historically traditional healers have as compared to modern physicians is that traditional healers are truly members of the community. They know what the issues are within particular families, within particular segments of the community. In modern medicine, it's actually rare for physicians to live in the same neighborhoods that their patients do. It's actually unusual. Whereas historically, we were integrated. The healer was a part a genuine part of the community. The goal is to cure or control disease in the individual in modern medicine, and the goal for traditional medicine was community health. And certainly managing disease processes in the individual is always very important, but community health looks at all kinds of things in terms of the community dynamics. This is an old photograph from Fort Kearny, and look at all those teepees just lined up next to each other and surrounded by a wall. And our traditional healers would talk about this in more poetic and mystical terms, but saying how we're living outside of balance. We're not supposed to live within walls like that. But in truth, are these people at higher risk for influenza, cholera, measles, smallpox? Absolutely. So living outside the balance of nature actually has an impact on community health as well. Well, communication is very different as well. In modern medicine, we're taught a very linear way to think about how we talk to our patients. And all of us in medical care can go through an H&P for inpatient, right? You get your chief complaint, your past medical history, or history of present illness, past medical history, past surgical history, medications, allergies, social history, family history, review of systems, laboratory data, physical assessment, and plan. Right? Did I miss anything? That's how we're taught to think, right? Well, what if the patient's story starts at family history? Or what if from the patient's perspective, their story starts at social history? We're taught to interrupt them and say, no, you can't tell your story from your perspective. You have to tell your story from my perspective. I'm the doctor. How arrogant of us. But that's how we're taught to think. That's how we're taught to approach patients. I wonder how much communication we lose simply because we don't let patients tell their story from their perspective. The traditional healers would find that ludicrous. That's ridiculous. You don't tell a patient how to tell their story. You listen to their story. That's how you connect with them. So in the traditional way, the communication is circular. And the skill of the traditional healer is to speak from the patient's perspective and to understand what's happening in the patient's world from their perspective, and not just focusing the framework on the scientific perspective. So talk about cultural competency and how we are trained, even in our modern medical systems, to not allow people to tell their stories. It makes me wonder why, or not why, but it makes me realize why we have such loss of communication in that doctor-patient interaction. I think we have a lot to learn from our traditional healers. And one of the things that I learned from one of my uncles, Rick Two Dogs, he's actually a well-known medicine man at Pine Ridge. And one of the things he told me, he says, when you're working with your patients, because we've had discussions about this, the differences in modern and traditional medicine. He said, do you know the most important question you can ask your patient? We were talking about diabetes. The most important question you can ask your patient is, do you believe you can manage this? I thought that's brilliant. Because if a patient believes that they can, they're at a different starting point than a patient who believes that they cannot. And I didn't learn that in medical school. I learned that from a medicine man. And that's, I think, brilliant. What an important question to understand the patient's perspective, not just the medical science. Well, value systems are also very different. In modern times, they kind of have an exclusive value system. So if you're a member of an exclusive organization, or you go to an exclusive restaurant, or you live in an exclusive neighborhood, where people are excluded, that's seen as good and valuable. It's kind of like a pyramid. So in modern society, we're trying to move up. So concepts like alone at the top, where you're in a league of your own, those are seen as good and valuable, right? Well, in the traditional way, it's an inclusive value system. You can think of it as an inverted pyramid. And if people are moving up, they're moving up to be equal with each other, including the healers, not the hierarchical system that we have now. Within healthcare, unfortunately, the hierarchy, I think, also inhibits open communication and connectivity with each other. Traditionally, that was not the case. We were all seen as equals. Modern medicine, we value confidentiality. Traditional medicine, we value family and community participation. And I think that's one arena where we haven't done a good job in modern medicine, is the value of community. And for those of us who participate in healing ceremonies, quite often, people from all over the reservation will come to participate in your healing ceremony. and the power that you feel when you know that your whole community wants you to be better is indescribable. It's more powerful than anything I felt from taking an ibuprofen. It is valuable and powerful. And just because we haven't quantified it in a scientific journal doesn't mean it isn't real. It is powerful medicine, and it's something we need to recapture as Indian people. In modern medicine, we tend to honor the physician for curing. We've created a very passive system of healthcare. How many of your patients don't know the names of their medications? That's very common. I would interview a patient and say, well, what medications do you want? Say, well, I'm not sure, but one of them is a heart pill. What kind of heart pill? A pink one. That's basically the degree of understanding. So if they take the medications, do what the doctor said, and they get better, they say, oh, that was a smart doctor. I did what he said and I got better. Well, it's very passive. In the traditional way, we honored the patient for wellness. And for those of us who participate in ceremonies, you're not passively participating in ceremony. That's active participation. There's things that you need to do. There's preparations that need to be made. So we really own that healing process as individuals. We're not just passive participants in healing. Well, the symbolism is very different. Modern medicine, serpent and staff, and in traditional medicine, at least traditional Lakota medicine wheel. And also need to be respectful that not all traditional American Indian healing systems are the same. So this really is from a Lakota perspective. We've all seen this symbol before, right? The single serpent wrapped around a staff. And that's the staff of Aesculapius, which is the ancient Greek symbol for medicine. A single serpent wrapped around the staff. We've also seen this one, right? The two serpents wrapped around the staff with the wings at the top. That's a caduceus, and that's the ancient Greek symbol for traitors and thieves. Believe it or not. So somewhere along the line, someone really screwed up. Indian Health Service, U.S. Public Health Service, using the wrong symbol. Do you guys use the single serpent here?
I think there's a double serpent hanging over the atrium next door. I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
It's above the coffee kiosk.
They're concerned about the traitors and thieves. So if you're watching the news, they say health alert, they flash the symbol, the traitors and thieves must be sick. So I think someone probably saw that and said, well, that's prettier, it's got wings, we'll use that one for medicine. That's the wrong symbol. So this is a medicine wheel, and it shows a circle with a cross in the middle. And just the simple symbolism is very beautiful. And most basically, it can symbolize the earth. East, north, west, and south. And it shows that all things are connected. So even things that seem opposite, east and west, north and south, they're all connected by the circle. And one way to perceive that is that in this room, we can say east is opposite from west, right? From the limited perspective of this room. But on this earth, if I go east, and I go east, and I keep going east, eventually where am I going to wind up? Right back here. So in truth, I'm over there. I'm over there. I'm over there. I'm over there, and I'm here. All connected by that circle. That circular symbolism, we tend to lose sight of the fact that we are living on a circle. So things that seem opposite are truly connected. The way we look at this from an individual perspective, there's 4 components to a person: spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional. And again, in modern medicine, we're very good at addressing physical component of disease. We're not very good at emotional, spiritual, and mental components of disease. In my residency, I did a family practice residency. The only time the word spirituality came up was when I was doing my hospice rotation. So we had to wait until there was a 6-month impending death before we could even say the word spirituality. Now, taking spirituality out of medicine is something our ancestors would think is crazy. Because in truth, people have spiritual experience. And to take human experience out of the healing paradigm doesn't make any sense. No wonder we're ineffective. And I've done a lot of work in integrative medicine, what we're calling alternative medicine as well. And I've heard my colleagues that are in alternative medicine, they say things like, we have found that when medicine includes spirituality, it's so much more powerful. From a Lakota perspective, that's kind of like saying, we have found that apple pie tastes better if it has apple filling in it. So I tell them, That's very why. So of course, spirituality is a key component to healing because it's a key component to all of us. Well, let's look at this in even more depth. Look at from public health perspective. In our spiritual arena, we have a lot of cultural belief systems. In the mental arena, educational attainment. In the physical arena, environmental factors that influence health. In the emotional arena, social factors that influence health. Does culture have an impact on health? Well, what about the culture of diabetes, the culture of poverty? Absolutely. Does educational attainment correlate with health status? Absolutely. That's proven in scientific literature in public health. Are there environmental factors that have an impact on health? Absolutely. In the emotional arena, in the cancer literature, it's been proven that people at the same stage of diagnosis, the ones who have strong social connections, live longer than those who are more socially isolated. We've proven it scientifically. So this isn't just poetic mysticism. This is real. Spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional components of our lives and of our communities have a direct impact on health status and health outcomes. It's from Ed McGaugh. His Lakota name is Eagle Man. From his book, Mother Earth Spirituality. He said, Native American Indians learned how to live with the earth on a deeply spiritual plane. The plight of the non-Indian world is that it has lost respect for Mother Earth, from whom and where we all come. We all start out in this world as tiny seeds, no different from our animal brothers and sisters, the deer, the bear, the buffalo, or the trees, the flowers, the winged people. Mother Earth is our real mother because every bit of us truly comes from her, and daily she takes care of us. And when we think about the beauty of the earth and its creatures and its plants, and we think about our historic lifestyle and diet, the things that we used to eat that were naturally occurring, everything used to be organic. We've taken that out of so much of our lives. Refined sugar, bleached flour, enriched flour, processed foods, preservatives. All these things that are not natural, they're not of the earth. They're created in laboratories and mass-produced and marketed and becomes our diet. Do we have problems with heart disease and diabetes as a result? Well, absolutely. And look at changing our traditional diet to commodity foods. For those of us who grew up on reservations, we're familiar with the commodity food program. Things like the sugar and the flour, and the used to be lard, now it's vegetable shortening. And the commodity grape juice, which is basically sugar water with a little bit of, I think, purple food coloring. They call it grape juice. That's what a lot of our people grew up eating. Now, we can look at that from a scientific perspective because clearly that has an impact on health. But from a traditional perspective, it's also living out of balance with nature. Very non-traditional. So from my uncle, Victor Two Dogs, from the book Wounded Warriors, we need to understand that the primary reason our people are so afflicted with addiction, poverty, abuse, and strife is that our way of life was taken from us. Everything was taken, and nothing was replaced. So don't look at that just in terms of physical loss of land. Look at it as loss of culture, loss of farming land, loss of free-range animals, loss of a lifestyle that was very healthy, and replaced with something that was very unhealthy. So again, living out of balance with the earth. So we have to find ways to try to recapture what was good about how we used to live. And in truth, it's not good just for Indian people. That would be good for everybody. This is a quote from Euripides, who was a Greek writer in the 5th century BC. He said, "What greater grief than the loss of one's native land? What greater grief than the loss of one's native land?" So this is a story that's recurred throughout history, not just in North America, not just with American Indian people, but all over the world. When people are dispossessed of land, they tend to have negative health outcomes. When there's colonization, culturally, there tends to be negative health outcomes. And that's something that we've seen, is a tremendous change in lifestyle and a tremendous loss of land and resources and freedom. Well, how does that have an impact on us from a traditional perspective? Now, one way to look at the medicine wheel, again, to the east in the spiritual realm are values, to the north in the mental realm are decisions, to the west in the physical realm are actions, to the south in the emotional realm are reactions. So we're constantly cycling around this medicine wheel, even if we're not familiar with the symbolism. So what we do is we interpret our values as decisions in the mental realm, implement those decisions into actions in the physical realm, and those actions produce reactions, either positive or negative. And then that allows feedback back into the value system. We can reevaluate what we're doing. So that's why our ancestors, our elders, would tell us that everything we do is spiritual. It's rooted in the spiritual arena. Even going to medical school or PA school or any type of advanced education, because our value systems tell us it's important for us to give back, to work hard to get this training so we can do something meaningful for our people. That's a deeply spiritual process. Well, what happens when traditional values are taken away? What happens when traditional land is taken away? When culture is lost? When freedom is lost? What is the impact on people? Well, without that strength of spirituality, often kids were taken to boarding schools and told terrible things about their ancestors. That they're in purgatory or they're in hell. All these terrible things that our children were told historically. And that has a huge impact on them. Their self-esteem, their belief systems, and all kinds of negative emotions, a lot of anger, a lot of depression, low self-esteem. And without that strength of culture and spirit to process that led to the decision to drink alcohol, take drugs, essentially self-medicating negative emotion. Is there a pill or a shot that's going to fix this? Is there something I can write down on my prescription pad as a doctor to fix that? Well, absolutely not. This is entirely outside the realm of allopathic medicine. And this is about spiritual healing and tradition and holism and spirituality. And in truth, what we need is a spiritual healing process. Re-engaging the strength of our traditions, all of our tribes, and all of our, even in Europe, the traditional belief systems were powerful and meaningful. We've lost sight of that, I think, not just as Indian people, but generally speaking. Our perspectives historically, when we had to live in balance with the earth just to survive, we've created technologies that allow us to live outside of balance. And that's not good for us as human beings. That's not the way we are supposed to live. And if we're going to recover, it's in a spiritual healing process. Traditional services. I know a lot of you know these or have seen these in terms of talking circles, healing ceremonies, herbal remedies, sweat lodge, and other types of traditional activities. And each tribe is different in terms of what they use. One of my favorite old photographs is from the 1880s. It's a picture of a sweat lodge. So for those of us who participate in this ceremony, you can see essentially the same structure. But they used to use buffalo hides, they use canvas blankets. Basically the same process of traditional healing ceremony. So I think that when we're looking at how do we best approach health disparities, we have to recognize that it's not all about more scientific medicine. We need that. But in truth, we need to recapture what our people have known for thousands of years as well. Aho, pilame yorego, takui. Thank you all very much for your attention. We have about 5 minutes or so if there's questions or comments, rumors, innuendos. Yes.
I'm very impressed, and I'm wondering if there are any ways that you found you can bring some of these ideas into modern medical education, because I think there's some value for all healers to understand these dimensions.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I've made attempts in a number of different arenas. And I think that people who would self-select to come to this are probably kind of preaching to the choir. The higher ups in medical science and I think health professions, education, leadership are not necessarily open to such things. That's been my experience, and maybe there's places that would be more open to it. But I'm 45 now, and I've worked in this arena for a long time. And what I honestly think we need, if we had the resources, we need an American Indian School of Health Sciences. We need a medical school with a department of traditional medicine. Not an occasional seminar, but embedded within medical training and nursing training and public health training across the entire spectrum of health professions education. And hopefully we can do it potentially in a piecemeal fashion with several universities, but down the road would be a long-standing vision and dream would be to have an American Indian School of Health Sciences, ASHES, sort of. That would be the paradigm, I think, to really integrate. Question? Yes.
I love your comment about how we really focus on disease, and we should probably call ourselves UW Disease. That's what we should. But I think everybody would agree, you are speaking to the choir here, that the importance of bringing the non-physical into the physical. But how do we do that when so much of the economics of healthcare and medicine is so focused on the physical? How do we even begin to show how we can do this in an economically sustainable way when we bring in something as important as spirituality?
Yeah, that's a big challenge. And when we look at value systems, probably the strongest modern value system is money. But we didn't have systems of currency. We didn't have money historically as tribal economies or tribal systems. And when you think about money, what a testament to the power of belief. Because money, a dollar bill used to be a silver certificate, right? You could trade in your dollar bill for a dollar's worth of silver. There's actually more money now than there are precious metals backing it up. We're no longer on the gold standard. So the reason money has value is because we all believe that it has value. There's nothing real or inherent about it. So look at the power of belief. We all agree it has value, therefore it does. But there's nothing real about it. It's all man-made, largely European invention. And now it's so pervasive that it has an impact on everything we're doing, exactly what you're talking about, even healthcare. So we can't even look at providing holistic healthcare without saying, well, what's the cost effectiveness? And unfortunately, that's the system that we're involved with. And unfortunately, I think we have to find ways to be as holistic as possible within the confines and the limitations of money. I hate the whole idea that we have to think of it that way. But you just remember, that's not an Indian invention at all. And in truth, it's man-made, it's artificial, it has no real value except that we all believe that it does. So that's a powerful religion right there, isn't it? Unfortunately, we have to think that way. Yeah.
Following up with the same comment, I think about so many things that you said today that change could occur without money. And the thing that stands out is like the uniforms of the IHS workers. I mean, to know that just that uniform alone triggers mistrust, and why maintain that, And I could see where that's not a money issue. It's a historical, play. And also involvement of family. I think about so many of my family members when they end up in the hospital, your family has to wait in the waiting room. And, and I'm Latino, we have a large Latino family, and that we feel like we're more of a nuisance. And don't come in here. But I think of the power of when the person is sick and they know that your family members are praying for them, that wouldn't cost any money to be welcoming of family.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes the conversations get stuck on issues, like you said, that are non-issues.
Yeah. And then, so another strong argument for something like an American Indian School of Health Sciences, where you don't put the families in the waiting rooms, they're participating in the healing process. And I bet we would have some pretty powerful outcomes if we did this in a culturally meaningful way.
Right.
So trying to fit that model into an existing medical training paradigm would be incredibly challenging. There's a lot of things we can do, but I think what we really need is We need our own school of health sciences that recognizes the value of traditional medicine. All right. Well, again, we're at 1 o'clock, so thank you all very
Thank everybody for coming. We're gonna try and get both of his talks up on the CHDI website. So